A teenage intern fixed a millionaire's jet, and what happened next left the CEO speechless. They always said the hottest heat didn't come from the sun. It came from the Georgia pavement. That morning, the asphalt outside Monroe Executive Airfield looked like it could fry an egg. Jaylen Brooks wiped sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand, tossed the empty water cooler jug onto the cart, and kept pushing. He wasn't complaining, not out loud anyway. He knew why he was here. It wasn't a glamorous job. He wasn't logging flight hours or even loading baggage. Jaylen was the kid they called when coffee machines needed refilling or someone left oil prints on the glass door. But he kept his mouth shut and his eyes open. Because Jaylen didn't just like planes. He understood them. He saw machines, like some people saw music, a symphony of metal, gears, combustion. It made sense to him. His late grandfather, Ernest Brooks, used to say, "If you listen close enough, every engine tells you what it needs." Most days, Jaylen would finish his shift and head straight to the hangar out back, the one nobody touched. In there, under a stained tarp, sat a 1968 Mooney M20C that hadn't flown since before he was born. His granddad bought it at an auction in Florida and trailered it back himself. It never left the ground again, but Jaylen was fixing it, piece by piece, quietly, patiently, with the same tools and the same notebook his granddad left him. It wasn't about flying it, not yet. It was about honoring the man who raised him, who taught him how to clean carburetors before he could drive. He'd been interning at Monroe for 4 months, no paycheck, just lunch breaks, gas money, and all the discarded parts he could carry home. He didn't complain. He was learning. That day felt like any other, until it didn't. At 11:42 a.m., the main terminal doors slammed open. A black SUV rolled up near the tarmac, too fast for protocol. The heat shimmered around it like a mirage. Out stepped a man in a pressed suit, barking into a phone, trailed by 2 assistants who looked like they hadn't blinked in a week. Jaylen didn't recognize the man, but he didn't need to. You could feel when somebody important showed up. People moved faster. Voices got tighter. "He's here early," one of the ground crew whispered. "That's Douglas Wexler, CEO of Pinnacle Aerotech." Jaylen had heard the name. Wexler ran one of the biggest aviation tech companies in the country, designed navigation software, owned 5 jets, probably flew in and out of cities faster than most people could order a coffee. Jaylen kept working, but his eyes flicked over. Wexler was pacing, glancing at his watch every 30 seconds. His Gulfstream G500, parked 20 feet away, sat with its underbelly access panel wide open. A technician crouched beneath it, head shaking slowly. Jaylen paused. The guy under the jet stood up, greasy towel in hand. "We've got a serious electrical issue in the environmental control system," he muttered to another staffer. "Compressor isn't taking power. I've got no clue why." Jaylen's ears perked up. The staffer's voice was tense. "How long to fix?" The technician shrugged. "We don't have the part. Might be a wiring fault. Could take hours." That's when Wexler exploded. "Hours?" he shouted. "I have a boardroom full of international investors in San Diego in 6 hours. That jet better be in the air in 30 minutes or I'm pulling contracts." People scattered like mice. One assistant whispered frantically into a phone. Another was pacing in circles, trying to get someone from FAA clearance on the line. Jaylen stood still, heart picking up speed. He didn't move, but he felt something move in him. He didn't have a badge. He didn't have a title, but he did have a memory. His granddad, bent under the hood of their truck, pulling a similar relay from an AC system, explaining how compressors don't just die, they lose trust in bad connections. Jaylen's hands twitched at his sides. He could see it, see the way the wiring ran, how the wrong ground could interrupt the startup sequence. The puzzle was playing out in his head, and he had an answer. But who was going to listen to the intern with dirt on his shirt? But something told him this wasn't the day to stay silent. "Where's the mechanic?" Wexler snapped. His voice cut through the air like a blade. Heads turned, then lowered just as fast. The certified mechanic had clocked out 3 hours ago, called out sick with food poisoning from a nearby diner. The only guy left was Jerry, not certified for jet diagnostics, who stood there clutching a clipboard and sweating through his uniform. "Sir," Jerry stammered, "we're trying to get someone in from Hartsfield-Jackson, but the closest available team is 2 hours out, maybe 3. Wexler looked like he was about to combust. Jaylen stood just inside the hangar door, half hidden behind a stack of crates. He kept his head down, but his eyes were locked on that G500 like a hawk watching prey. He had studied that exact model in the tech manuals he found online, page by page, over slow evenings in his granddad's garage. 3 hours, Wexler bellowed. Do I look like someone who has 3 hours to waste? No one answered. You couldn't answer questions like that. One of his assistants, a woman in tortoiseshell glasses and heels too expensive to walk on tarmac, stepped forward, clutching an iPad. Mr. Wexler, we could send for the secondary jet from Dallas, but even if it leaves in the next 15 minutes, it won't get here before... Wexler raised his hand. She stopped. No, I don't want another plane. I want that one, he said, pointing without looking. It has everything I need. The data, the files, the systems. I don't care if you pull it down the runway by hand, get it fixed. Jaylen's mind was racing. This wasn't some loose fuel cap. If the jet's ECS was offline and the compressor wasn't drawing power, it meant one of two things: bad relay or faulty wiring near the main control hub. If they were lucky, it was something loose or corroded, something that could be bypassed, something a guy like him could handle. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly, not from fear, from pressure. Then he saw the necklace glinting under his shirt. Reflexively, he pulled it out and clutched it. A worn bronze pilot wing, dulled from years of wear. His granddad gave it to him when he was 10. Earn this, the old man had said. Not with talk, with work. Jaylen turned toward the tarmac. Hey, he called quietly to Jerry, who was still fumbling with his notes. You checked the E36 line for grounding? If the sensor's not pulling current from the ECS, it might be a break near the lower relay bracket. Jerry frowned. What? Jaylen walked closer. The G500's ECS relay connects through a bypass cluster just under the floor panel near the cabin stairs. Sometimes it corrodes where the auxiliary compressor draws power. If it's not pulling voltage, that's your first suspect. Jerry blinked. Kid, what are you even talking about? I'm talking about your jet not flying because someone missed a corroded splice. Jerry was about to wave him off, until he noticed the way Wexler's assistant was watching. She'd overheard, and now she was looking at Jaylen like he wasn't invisible. Wexler noticed too. He turned. His stare was cold, analytical. He wasn't used to being interrupted, especially by teenagers in off-brand work boots. You, Wexler said. Who are you? Jaylen swallowed. Jaylen Brooks, sir. I intern here. Just do part-time stuff around the hangars. Wexler raised an eyebrow. And you think you can fix my jet? Jaylen hesitated. I think I know where to look. You don't have time to wait. You can stand here and guess for 3 hours, or let me take 15 minutes to prove I'm wrong. The assistant leaned in and whispered something to Wexler. He didn't respond at first. Then, you break it, you pay for it. Jaylen nodded once. Fair. Jerry stepped aside reluctantly as Jaylen dropped to one knee and opened the hatch under the stairs. His fingers moved like they had muscle memory. He knew what he was looking for. Copper burn marks, dust corrosion, a hairline crack in the protective shield. And there it was, a single loose connector, half-clipped, barely holding. A vibration like takeoff turbulence could have knocked it out completely. Jaylen looked up at Jerry, who was now peering over his shoulder. Told you, he said, but this wasn't over. Not yet. The real test was coming. The inside of the Gulfstream felt like a sauna. No air conditioning, no airflow, just the smell of hot leather and pressurized frustration. Jaylen reached into the access panel and gently pried the connector loose. It was worse than he thought. The contact pin was oxidized, slightly bent, and hadn't been seated properly in weeks, maybe months. Jerry watched from the side, arms folded but eyes unblinking now. You sure about this? He asked under his breath. No, Jaylen replied, not looking up. But if I'm wrong, your jet's still grounded. If I'm right, it flies. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small screwdriver, not from the hangar, but from his personal set. It had initials scratched into the side. E.B. Ernest Brooks. He filed the pin just enough to reseat it, tightened the crimp, then wrapped it in a replacement seal he'd swiped from an unused panel box earlier that morning. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid, reliable. Jaylen double-checked everything twice, then again. You ever done this before? Jerry asked. Jaylen paused. Not on a Gulfstream, but I did a similar fix on an old Piper Cherokee once. Heat shorts out wires the same way whether you're rich or not. Still, Jerry muttered, you ain't certified. Nope, Jaylen said, standing up. I'm not. He pushed the hatch shut, locked it down, and stepped back. Jerry looked nervous, like he was standing too close to fireworks. You really think this'll work? Jaylen looked over toward Wexler and the assistant, both watching from 10 yards away like spectators at a match they didn't pay to see. I guess we're about to find out. Wexler shouted, Get it started. The assistant motioned to the pilot, who had been standing near the wing, pretending not to eavesdrop. He nodded, climbed aboard, and slid into the cockpit. Jaylen and Jerry stayed outside, watching. The engines didn't fire immediately. You could hear the clicks, the whine, the pressure adjusting. Then, a sudden roar, low, steady, powerful. The left turbine came alive, then the right, and then the cabin lights kicked in. The AC started humming. Cold air drifted out the open door. Jaylen felt his shoulders drop for the first time all day. He turned toward Jerry, who blinked like someone had slapped him with a textbook. Well, I'll be... Wexler walked over slowly, adjusting his tie like he was calming himself down. His expression wasn't angry anymore, just sharp, focused. You did that? He asked. Jaylen nodded once. Yes, sir. You're how old? 17. You certified? No, sir. Then what the hell makes you think you're qualified to touch a multi-million-dollar jet? Jaylen didn't blink. Nothing, except I knew what the problem was, and nobody else did. Wexler stared at him. The kind of stare people give when they don't know whether to be impressed or furious. Jaylen didn't flinch. He didn't shrink. He'd already had too many people tell him he was just something. Just a kid. Just the intern. Just the guy who mopped floors. He was done with that. I learned from my grandfather, Jaylen added. He was Air Force maintenance, 40 years. Said the best mechanics aren't the ones with the patch on their shirt. They're the ones who respect the machine. Wexler looked him over again. What's that around your neck? He asked. Jaylen glanced down, fingers instinctively curling around the necklace. He didn't answer right away. The assistant stepped forward. That looks like an old Air Force pilot wing. Jaylen nodded. It was his. He wore it when he taught me how to work on engines. Gave it to me the year before he passed. Wexler said nothing. He just looked at the necklace. Not like it was jewelry, but like it was a story he hadn't read yet. Then he turned toward the jet, now fully operational, its diagnostics lighting up on a nearby tablet screen. He said nothing for a long time. Finally, he muttered, I've had certified engineers mess up worse than this. Jaylen took that as a compliment, but Wexler wasn't done, not even close. Wexler didn't speak right away. He circled the plane like he needed to see it with fresh eyes. Or maybe he just didn't want to look directly at Jaylen until he made up his mind. The engines purred now. The pilot gave a thumbs up from the cockpit window. Diagnostics were green. Everything was stable. Jaylen stood there, hands at his sides, trying to slow his breathing. He wasn't nervous. Not anymore. But his heart still thumped in his ears, not from fear, from adrenaline. Then Wexler turned and walked right up to him. Who signed off on you being here? He asked. Jaylen hesitated. No one. Wexler looked toward Jerry. Did you give him permission? Jerry raised both hands. He has to take a look. I didn't think he'd actually do anything. He just fixed it. Wexler looked back at Jaylen. So you just saw the problem, knew how to fix it, and jumped in? Yes, sir. You could have damaged a $50 million jet. I know. You could have fried the ECS, caused a safety failure. I know. You could have lost me the entire trip. I know that too. Jaylen didn't say it with arrogance. He said it like someone who already ran through every worst-case scenario in his head, fixed what needed fixing, and walked out the other side. Wexler studied him for another long second, then looked down again at the necklace. Your grandfather, you said he was Air Force? Yes, sir. Ernest Brooks. Served 22 years in aircraft maintenance. Taught me everything I know. Wexler nodded slowly. I remember those wings. My father was Navy. Different style, but same kind of thing. You don't wear those unless you've earned them. Jaylen nodded. There was silence between them for a beat. But it wasn't awkward, just heavy, like there were years of meaning inside that small bronze wing, and both of them knew it. Wexler motioned for him to follow. Walk with me. Jaylen didn't hesitate. They walked side by side across the edge of the tarmac, out of earshot from the assistants, the staff, the noise. I've seen a lot of kids try to impress me, Wexler said, his voice lower now. Most come in with degrees they didn't earn, resumes they copied from a friend, confidence they don't deserve. You walked in with dirt on your hands and no excuses. Jaylen shrugged. Didn't have time for excuses. Wexler smirked. That's the right answer. They stopped near a loading ramp. Wexler leaned against the railing. How long have you been here? 4 months. Unpaid internship. Started by sweeping floors. I hang around after hours working on an old Mooney in the back hangar. You trying to be a pilot? Jaylen shook his head. I'm trying to be the guy they call when the pilot's scared to fly. Wexler raised an eyebrow. That's a hell of a thing to say. It's what my granddad always said. Pilots get medals. Mechanics keep people alive. He liked being in the background. Said there's pride in knowing no one noticed, because that meant you did it right. Wexler nodded again, slowly. Sounds like he was a smart man. He was. Jaylen didn't add that he still talked to him sometimes, that he still had his notebook filled with hand-drawn wiring diagrams and scrawled-out lessons written in blocky handwriting, that he sometimes fixed things just to imagine his granddad watching. Wexler pushed off the railing and turned to face him. Let me ask you something, Jaylen. What are you doing working here, unpaid, when you could probably make money fixing things somewhere else? Jaylen looked him in the eye. Because out here, I get to be close to the thing I love. The one thing that makes sense, no matter what else is going on. Planes don't lie. They don't pretend. They either work or they don't. If something's broken, you fix it. If it's not, you leave it alone. Wexler didn't answer right away. Finally, he let out a small laugh, not a mocking one, one of recognition. You remind me of someone I used to be. Jaylen said nothing. Wexler's face shifted. A flicker of something more personal underneath the billionaire exterior. Then it was gone. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a small card, held it out. Call this number tomorrow. Ask for Marlene. Tell her I want you to come to Dallas next weekend. No promises, but I'd like to see what you can do with a real team in a real hangar. Paid. Jaylen stared at the card. You serious? I don't joke about jets, Wexler said, or potential. Jaylen took the card. His fingers were still dirty. Grease smudged the corner. He didn't care. I'll be there. Wexler nodded once, started walking back toward the jet. Jaylen stood there for a moment longer, holding the card in one hand and the necklace in the other. But this wasn't the end of the day. Just the beginning of something way bigger than he'd ever imagined. Back near the jet, the air had cooled, literally. The ECS was pumping again, air flowing through the cabin vents like the system had never glitched. The pilot stood by the stairwell, scrolling through diagnostics on a tablet. Every system read normal. Jerry was still standing off to the side, arms crossed like he'd just watched a ghost perform surgery. One of the assistants approached Jaylen, offering him a cold bottle of water and a strange look, halfway between respect and disbelief. You really pulled that off, she muttered. Jaylen unscrewed the cap, nodded, took a long drink. Yeah, I guess I did. She leaned in, lowering her voice. Do you have any idea how many people would have just stood back and waited for the real expert? You didn't even flinch. Jaylen looked toward the hangar, then down at his hands. Wasn't the first time something looked broken and no one wanted to touch it. Before she could respond, the pilot called out, "We're good to go." Wexler turned back toward the cabin, but not before giving Jaylen one last look. It wasn't the smug kind of approval. It was the kind that made people realize you'd seen something that couldn't be unseen. The CEO disappeared inside, and the door hissed shut behind him. Jaylen watched the stairs fold up and lock tight against the frame. Then the engines surged, louder now. The plane began to taxi slowly toward the runway. He stayed on the edge of the tarmac, eyes locked on the G500 as it turned into position. Guess it worked, Jerry said, finally walking up beside him. Jaylen didn't answer. He was still watching the jet like it was more than just a machine. Like it was carrying something that had started on that runway, but was headed somewhere he hadn't even imagined yet. Jerry shook his head. You know, I've been around this airfield 8 years, seen dozens of mechanics come and go. You're not just lucky. You listened. You looked like you belonged under that jet. Jaylen smiled faintly. I felt like I did. Jerry clapped him lightly on the shoulder. Don't know what's coming next for you, kid, but it ain't sweeping floors. They stood there in silence as the jet gathered speed, wheels skimming the concrete, lifting gracefully into the hot Georgia sky. Jaylen shielded his eyes, tracking it until it became a speck in the blue. The assistant in tortoiseshell glasses stepped up beside him again. So, what are you going to do with that card? He pulled it from his pocket, held it up to the light. Just a number and a name, Marlene. But it felt heavier than anything he'd held all summer. Call it, he said quietly. She nodded. Good, you should. Jaylen didn't say anything else. Didn't have to. The plane was gone now, but the airfield still felt charged. As the crowd of employees began to return to their usual business, refueling other aircraft, cleaning up spills, checking manifests, Jaylen walked back toward the hangar alone. Inside, the old Mooney M20C waited for him, still under the tarp, still untouched, still broken. But today, something felt different. He walked up to the side of the plane and laid a hand on the fuselage. His fingers curled into a light fist and tapped twice, a habit he picked up from his grandfather. Almost there, he whispered. He sat down on the rolling stool and pulled out the notebook. The pages were worn, covered in sketches and scribbled instructions. There was one note he always flipped to when he needed grounding, a phrase written in block letters across the top of a diagram. Learn the silence before the roar. Jaylen read it again, then closed the book. Outside, the sun had started to dip. The shadows stretched longer across the hangar floor. He stayed there for a while, letting the moment settle. Not everything had changed, but something had. The necklace around his neck felt warmer now, not from heat, from meaning. But tomorrow, that card in his pocket might be the key to everything he'd been chasing without even knowing it. Jaylen showed up to the airfield the next morning like nothing had happened. Same boots, same shirt, same backpack with a peanut butter sandwich smashed in foil at the bottom. But people looked at him differently now. Jerry gave him a nod, not the polite kind, the you earned that kind. One of the office staff offered him a fresh cup of coffee. He didn't even drink coffee, but he took it anyway. It felt like a trophy. He sat by the side door of the hangar, sunlight streaking in through a gap in the frame. The card Wexler gave him was in his palm, edges starting to bend from how many times he'd turned it over that morning. He didn't call right away. Instead, he walked back to the Mooney, pulled off the tarp, climbed up onto the wing, and just sat there, legs dangling off the side. This plane had been his whole summer, his quiet project, his private thing. But now, that moment with the G500 felt like it had kicked open a door he hadn't even known was locked. He stared out at the field, remembering Wexler's face. Not when he yelled, but after. The way his voice changed when he saw the necklace. Jaylen held it now between his fingers, rolling it gently. He could still hear his grandfather's voice. Most people fix problems by accident. You solve them. You see them coming before they land. He didn't know if he wanted to be an engineer, a mechanic, a pilot. He didn't care about titles. He just wanted to be the person people turned to when something stopped working, and make it right again. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. Unknown number. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. Hello? A clear, direct voice came through. Jaylen Brooks? Speaking. This is Marlene from Pinnacle Aerotech. Mr. Wexler asked me to follow up. He's arranging a visit to our Dallas hangar next weekend. He'd like you to see the operations up close. You'll be compensated for your time. Jaylen blinked. He looked at the dusty Mooney, then back out at the runways beyond the fence. Yes, he said. I'll be there. Marlene confirmed the details, gave him a list of what to bring, who to ask for, and what time the car would pick him up from the field. Then she thanked him like he was someone who'd already done a job worth remembering. He hung up, then sat back, leaning against the cool metal of the plane. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about being noticed by someone big. It was about finally feeling seen. Like the work he'd done in silence had spoken loud enough for the right ears. He'd taken a chance, risked something, fixed something that no one else could. Not because he was better, but because he cared more. And now, the future wasn't just some far-off dream. It was calling. The next Saturday, the town felt too small. Jaylen stood outside the Monroe airfield gates with a duffel bag over his shoulder and the pilot wing necklace tucked under his shirt, A sleek black sedan rolled up, driver in uniform, window down. "Jaylen Brooks?" He nodded. "Hop in." He didn't say much on the ride to the private terminal, just watched the scenery blur. Fast food spots, tire shops, little houses with cracked driveways. The places he passed every day, now behind tinted glass. When they landed in Dallas, the contrast hit hard. Bigger runways, towering hangars, everything polished and humming with money. But Jaylen didn't feel out of place. He walked into the Pinnacle Aerotech hangar like he'd been there before. Not physically, but in his mind. He'd dreamed of this kind of space since he was 10. Clean tools, real engines, no broken tarps or scavenged wires. Wexler met him there, in jeans and a polo this time. "Glad you came," he said. Jaylen shook his hand. Wexler introduced him to the team, a mix of engineers, tech specialists, flight testers. No one looked down on him. No one raised eyebrows at his age. Wexler had made it clear. Jaylen wasn't here to learn. He was here to show. Over the next 4 hours, Jaylen solved 3 electrical issues on a mid-range twin-engine mock-up, calibrated a faulty readout system, and caught a design flaw in a new fuel line routing prototype. By the time they took a break, 2 engineers were following him around asking questions. One even offered to trade toolkits. Wexler approached him after the last walkthrough, holding a folder. "This isn't a job offer yet," he said. "It's a mentorship pipeline. 2 weeks in Dallas every other month, paid. You work under our senior diagnostics team. Next year, if it goes well, we talk career." Jaylen took the folder and stared at it. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he looked Wexler in the eye. "My grandfather would have liked you," he said. Wexler smiled. "Sounds like he'd have liked you more." Jaylen laughed, just a little. As the sun dipped behind the hangars, he stepped outside. Alone now, quiet. He reached for the necklace and held it up to the light. Not flashy, not fancy, just a pair of bronze wings earned through sweat, oil, and grit. He took a deep breath. Because some wings come with a license, others come with legacy. If this story made you feel something, pass it on. Someone out there might be waiting for a chance just like Jaylen. Don't let them go unseen.